They laughed at her scars. They doubted her hands could even steady a rifle. But when the night turned into a slaughter, and even the elite SEAL snipers missed their mark, every soldier realized something terrifying. God might not be on their side tonight. What made a lone woman, mocked and underestimated, step into a fight where America's most lethal shooters had already failed? How did she keep calm when an entire enemy unit closed in, with her comrades seconds from being wiped out? And why did the very soldiers who once sneered at her now refuse to speak her name without trembling? Because what happened in those next 42 seconds would rewrite the story of the battlefield forever. And leave one chilling truth. Sometimes, survival doesn't come from God's side, but from the side no one believed in. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you'll witness the untold story of a woman who turned doubt into dominance. And if you believe the underestimated deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button. Now, because these are the stories the world almost forgot. It was 2012. At a forward operating base near Kandahar, Afghanistan, the dust never settled, and neither did the doubts. Inside the dimly lit tent, U.S. soldiers cleaned their rifles, checked their night vision scopes, and quietly traded glances at the only woman among them, Staff Sergeant Claire Donovan. Her face bore a long scar from a training accident years ago, and her hands, though steady in training, sometimes shook under pressure. The men whispered. Corporal Mason Harlow smirked. She won't last 5 minutes out there. Private Reed Dawson chuckled. Hell, she'll probably drop the rifle before she fires. Even Colonel Richard Hayes, their seasoned commander, gave her a look, not cruel but heavy with doubt. Claire felt every word cut into her. But she didn't speak. Instead, she polished her M4 rifle, her fingers brushing over the cold steel as if it were a promise. These men didn't know the endless nights she'd spent training alone, or why she carried the weight of proving herself. She wasn't waiting for their approval. She was waiting for the battlefield. And none of them knew that before sunrise. Claire Donovan's hands would decide who survived in Kandahar's killing fields. The mission began under a pale Afghan moon. The unit moved silently through the rocky outskirts of Maiwand district, Kandahar. Every soldier's breath was tight, their boots crunching against loose gravel. Then it happened. A flash. A thunderclap of gunfire ripped through the silence. The Taliban had set the perfect ambush. From rooftops and hidden trenches, tracer rounds lit up the night sky like fireflies of death. Colonel Richard Hayes barked orders, his voice almost drowned by explosions. Snipers! Take the high ground! But even the legendary Navy SEAL marksmen, embedded with the unit, missed their shots. The enemy knew their positions too well, moving like shadows in the ruins. Bullets tore past helmets, striking walls, ricocheting in bursts of sparks. Corporal Mason Harlow, the same man who mocked Claire hours earlier, froze behind a crumbling wall. His hand shook as he fumbled for extra magazines. In those few minutes, the battlefield turned into chaos. Fear spread like wildfire. Soldiers who once joked and sneered, now whispered with trembling voices, God's not on our side tonight. And as the men lost hope, one scarred woman quietly raised her rifle into the burning dark. The battlefield burned under the Afghan night. Mortar blasts shook the ground in Maiwand district, throwing dust and fire into the air. The men huddled behind shattered walls, their confidence shattered along with the concrete. Colonel Hayes shouted over the chaos, but his orders carried no weight now. Even the SEAL snipers, men the entire platoon once trusted like legends, had missed their marks. The enemy knew every blind spot, every angle, every weakness. Private Reed Dawson whispered, his voice trembling. God's not with us tonight. Another soldier crossed himself quickly, his eyes wide with panic. The words spread like poison, faith collapsing faster than their defenses. And then there was Claire Donovan. She sat with her back pressed to a broken wall, her scarred face lit by the orange glow of burning vehicles. She didn't pray. She didn't beg. Instead, she tightened her grip on her M4 rifle, fingers wrapping steady around the trigger guard. Her eyes narrowed. If God had abandoned them, then she would not. What could one scarred woman possibly do when America's best had already failed? The gunfire never stopped. Bullets shredded the mud brick walls of Maiwand, each impact sending shards flying. Soldiers hugged the dirt, praying the night would end. But Staff Sergeant Claire Donovan was done hiding. She rose slowly from behind cover, her silhouette framed against the burning glow of a disabled Humvee. The scar across her cheek caught the firelight, no longer a mark of weakness, but of defiance. Claire, get down. Colonel Hayes barked, his voice half command, half plea. Corporal Mason Harlow, pale with fear, shouted, "You'll get yourself killed!" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward into the open street, her boots crunching on broken glass. The enemy's searchlight found her instantly, painting her body in white against the black sky. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The Americans watching in disbelief, the Taliban stunned at her audacity. Claire lifted her rifle, calm and steady. The hands once mocked as too weak for war now held America's last chance at survival. And with the world's eyes on her, the first shot she fired would either save them or seal their doom. The clock might as well have started ticking the moment. Claire Donovan raised her rifle. The battlefield, once deafening, seemed to hold its breath. Through the smoke and chaos, she exhaled slowly, just like in training. Her first round cracked through the night. A Taliban commander, shouting orders from a rooftop, collapsed instantly. For a split second, silence rippled across the enemy line. Her second shot came before anyone blinked. A machine gun nest that had pinned down Corporal Mason. Harlow exploded into sparks as the gunner fell. Mason stared wide-eyed, realizing the same woman he mocked was now the only shield between life and death. Claire didn't pause. Every pull of the trigger was precise, surgical. Years of doubt, insult, and quiet, nights of practice had forged this moment. To her comrades, it felt unreal, like watching a storm concentrate itself into one human form. But the Taliban were not finished. More fighters surged forward, screaming into the firelight. And as the seconds ticked past, every soldier wondered, how long could one scarred woman hold back an entire army? The Taliban fighters surged like a dark wave through the narrow streets of Maiwand. Their shouts echoed against broken walls, the rattle of AK-47s drowning out everything else. But in the middle of it all stood Staff Sergeant Claire Donovan, her rifle steady, her eyes cold. She fired, shifted, fired again, each shot finding its mark. An enemy sniper dropped from a rooftop. A second fell while sprinting through the alley. She moved with a rhythm as if the chaos obeyed her. The men around her watched in stunned silence. Corporal Mason Harlow, still pressed to the ground, whispered, "She's not human. She's a storm." Private Reed Dawson felt his own courage flicker back to life as he loaded fresh rounds. His eyes fixed on her. Claire reloaded without hesitation, sliding the magazine home in one smooth motion. Dust swirled around her boots as grenades exploded nearby, yet she didn't flinch. Her scarred face was calm, almost serene, as though this was the moment she had been waiting for all her life. But then the enemy regrouped, turning their full firepower on her alone. Could even a storm survive that? The air in Maiwand shook with violence. Dust clouds mixed with the burning smell of diesel, as the Taliban redirected everything toward Staff Sergeant Claire Donovan. A dozen rifles fired at once, bullets sparking against the walls and tearing the ground around her boots. Any other soldier would have broken. But Claire didn't move back. She shifted positions like a ghost, firing from the open street, then ducking behind a collapsed wall only to reappear seconds later. Each time she rose, another enemy fell. Her defiance lit something inside the men who had been paralyzed with fear. Colonel Richard Hayes, crouched with blood on his sleeve, growled into the radio, "Push forward! If she's standing, so are we." Corporal Mason Harlow finally snapped out of his panic, scrambling to lay suppressive fire. Private Reed Dawson ran ammo toward Claire, shouting over the chaos, "You're not fighting alone!" In that instant, the battlefield shifted. The unit that had been retreating found their courage, not from God, not from their commanders, but from the scarred woman they once mocked. But Claire wasn't fighting for their respect. She was fighting for something far deeper, and the men had yet to discover what it was. 42 seconds. That was all it took. When the last echo of gunfire faded, the night over Maiwand, Kandahar was eerily quiet. Smoke drifted across the broken streets. The Taliban fighters who moments ago, charged with fury, now lay scattered, some fallen, others retreating into the dark hills. The American unit barely moved at first, stunned into silence. Their ears still rang, their hearts still raced, but their eyes all fixed on Staff Sergeant Claire Donovan. She stood alone in the open street, chest rising and falling, her rifle lowered at last. The scar across her face caught the faint moonlight. No longer a mark of weakness, but of survival. Colonel Richard Hayes, usually a man of steel, spoke with a voice heavy with awe. "Remember this night. She saved us." His words carried across the broken formation, and no one dared to disagree. Corporal Mason Harlow, who once mocked her, couldn't meet her eyes. Private Reed Dawson whispered, "She's not the one who doesn't belong. She's the reason we're still alive. But what they whispered after that night was stranger still, because Claire's name was never spoken the same way again. In the weeks after the Battle of Maiwand, the story spread quietly through the barracks, then across other bases in Kandahar. Soldiers who had once laughed at staff. Sergeant Claire Donovan's scars no longer spoke her name with mockery. They spoke it with something between fear and reverence. Colonel Richard Hayes, when asked about the ambush, never spoke of strategy or numbers. He simply said, "We were saved by 42 seconds, and by Claire Donovan." His words became a kind of legend whispered among younger recruits. Corporal Mason Harlow, ashamed of his earlier words, never joked about her again. Private Reed Dawson told anyone who would listen that the scarred woman was the reason an entire platoon still breathed. Yet Claire herself never sought glory. In her eyes, it wasn't about medals or recognition. It was about survival and proving that doubt could be turned into dominance. And so the whispers grew into a story that lived not in official reports, but in the hearts of those who saw it with their own eyes. Sometimes survival doesn't come from God's side, but from the side no one believed in. If you believe heroes like Claire Donovan deserve to be remembered, subscribe now, because these are the stories the world almost forgot.